By the ebb of 1945, Brook had a fresh challenge to put on Love's Labour's Lost as the youngest director in history of the Stratford Upon Avon Festival. Barry Jackson, who had agreed to control the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre, had known the festivals since his youth, since Frank Benson's Meridian with the Band of Brothers, when playgoing was an intimate town affair, a family ritual, with only Miss Corelli disapproving from Mason Croft. Often he had sat in the old plum-cake sham Gothic structure destroyed by fire, in the temporary quarters, a borrowed cinema, and in the huge brick building, 1932, that had housed little to please the critics, though audiences multiplied. Ensuing festivals had been static and smug. Technically a governor, Jackson had had no part in them, even if none could recognize better the infrequent flash, as when Theodore Komazarjevsky saw half a dozen plays with a sharp and irreverent eye, or when in 1936 and 1937 Donald Wolfett fumed like a sudden gin from an unlikely bottle. Actors were cleft from the audience by a gulf hard to span. Balliol, Holloway, agreed that if you came down stage on a fine night, you could sometimes see the front stalls, but visibility had to be clear. Stratford had just kept going during the war. Now, 1946 must be the new spring. Everything was in a comfortable trench of tradition. Little showed above the parapet, and Jackson realized that he must freshen the festival, lead the visitors to the theatre as well as to the tomb. There must be a largely young company, more rehearsals, no return to a logjam of 6 premieres in 6 nights. The strongly practical Robert Atkins, director for 2 years in Amelia that hardly suited him, had seen what could be done. Jackson, with new and simpler authority, began to do it. A few recognized principals, such as Robert Harris and Valerie Taylor, led his cast, and he waited for the impact of Paul Schofield and Peter Brook, who had just come of age. "The boy," he said, "is the youngest earthquake I've known." The boy would say of him, "Every conceivable value at Stratford was buried in deadly sentimentality and complacent worthiness, a traditionalism approved largely by town, scholar, and press. It needed the boldness of Sir Barry Jackson to throw all this out of the window, and so make a search for true values possible once more." It would be a few nights before any sort of earthquake. Jackson, employing for each play a different director, chose to open with The Tempest, the great poem, epithalamic spectacle that on the stage can stiffen, as it did now, to a diversion obstinately machine-bound. The second play, a much-clipped Cymbeline, collision between Snow White and the Decameron, is remembered for Schofield's enjoyment of the blockish Cloten, an astonishment to critics who did not know him. Brook's turn next, his treatment of Love's Labour's Lost, a comedy that had been Jackson's favourite child. Often Sir Barry would quote a passage from David Lindsay's fantasy, A Voyage to Arcturus. It looked as if life forms were being coined so fast by nature that there was not physical room for all, and refer it to Love's Labour's Lost. There, a young dramatist, inventive beyond belief, was seeking, while he could, to express everything as elegantly as he could, and as if there could be no theatre after the morrow. Pict, spruce, peregrinate, the comedy is a festival of words. Armado has a mint of phrases in his brain. Costard is overwhelmed by the marvel of remuneration. Holofernes loves the elegancy, facility, and golden cadence of poesy. Sir Nathaniel speaks of a singular and choice epithet. Berowne, in love with language, may be Shakespeare's self-portrait, set in a speech by Rosaline. His eye begets occasion for his wit. For every object that the one doth catch, the other turns to a mirth-moving jest. Peter Brook, as naturally at home in Paris as in London, had been to Paris that spring, where he met Cocteau, Duvivier, and Louis Jouvet, and saw the first Parisian Love's Labour's Lost for 30 years, a French translation that seemed to anticipate much of Molière, Marivaux, and Musset, with certain scenes changed and rewritten, and Moth allowed to utter an epigram of Voltaire. It pleased Brook, who by now had fixed his own treatment in his mind. When he met his players, he knew what he required to a comma, though, prepared for trial and error, he would often transfer the comma to another place. From previous experience, he believed that actors, and especially stage managers, were contemptuous of anyone unable to make up his mind. Anxiously, he had marshalled his production, deliberating with cardboard players and a model of his set, going over and over his moves and blackening the pages of his prompt book. On the rehearsal morning he discovered very soon that his plan did not work in practice. No matter. While it was going awry, another plan had begun to unfold, full of personal variations, shaped by individual enthusiasms and laziness, promising such different rhythms, opening so many unexpected possibilities. It was Brook's personal point of deviation. He walked away from his book, in among the actors, and never looked at a written plan again. There are pictures of him wearing overcoat and muffler in the frigid North London rehearsal rooms, and smiling benignly as he coaxes his first Stratford company through the text.